We all love heroes, right? Shining beacons of nobility, persistence, and bravery, men and women who refuse to quit in the face of overwhelming odds, who rise to the occasion, who overcome their inabilities and their weaknesses, who learn to put aside selfish desires in service of a greater good. These are the kinds of characters that have endeared themselves to audiences. Even in worlds with dragons and orcs or lightsabers and hyperspace travel, the inhabitants can teach and inspire us by demonstrating the heights of human virtue. Well, apparently modern Hollywood doesn't share our affection for these characters, because the past few years have brought on what some might call a full-scale assault on the heroes we've known and loved for so long. There are any number of examples you could toss out that would fit this mold, but we're going to focus in on Star Wars and Lucasfilm, because they basically started this whole thing. But we need not be entirely negative. It is, in fact, possible to say goodbye to an aging hero without reducing him to a shell of his former self. It's remarkable the number of parallels between Logan and the Star Wars sequels / Obi-Wan Kenobi. Both happened quite a few years after we last saw the character and after some unknown tragedy has happened. In both cases, the last thing we saw the hero do was in fact quite heroic, and the stories were wrapped up in hopeful, if not entirely positive ways. The older heroes then have to be convinced, directly or indirectly, by a younger woman or girl that they should take up the fight once again. And in 2 cases, the hero dies, having given his life for the cause he rejoined. But hold that thought for a moment while I pay for my dog's treats thanks to this video's sponsor, Factor. This is Dalinar, by the way. He's a very good boy. Do you like food? Of course you do. But food can take up a lot of time between deciding what to eat, shopping for it, preparing and cooking it, especially when you've only got so much time for lunch. Factor makes it easy for you to avoid takeout and have delicious, nutritious, chef-prepared, no-nonsense meals in 5 easy pops. First, you pop the box open. Then, pop the meals into your fridge. Once you're hungry, pop a few holes in the film and pop the meal into the microwave. Then, after just 2 minutes, you pop the meal right into your mouth. I think that was 5. I'm not very good at math. But I don't have to be. I don't have to worry about counting calories because Factor can do that for me with their meal plan, Calorie Smart. Offered alongside keto, chef's choice, and vegan plus veggie, giving you options for seafood, meat, and plant-based meals. Factor takes the decision-making out of lunchtime for me, giving me more time and energy into focusing on my goals. Maybe you want to get a lunchtime workout in. Well, Factor not only gives you the time to do that, it also has a Protein Plus meal plan to help make sure your gains happen as expected. Whatever your goals, Factor can help you have more time for them. Head to Factor75.com or click the link down below and enter code SAMWISE50 to get 50% off your first box of Factor. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video, and now back to our heroes. So in this comparison, we're going to cover 3 main topics: purpose, hope, and agency. Let's start with purpose, because that's kind of important. A hero needs to have a reason for what he does, a driving force behind his actions. Would anyone care to tell me what Luke's purpose was on this island? JJ? Ryan? Anybody? Right, he didn't have one. He was just there to mope. I'm not sure if I can think of a behavior less heroic than sulking. Heroes are defined by the incredible deeds that they do for the good of others. Luke's journey in the original trilogy was not about his self-fulfillment. Yes, he naturally had to grow into a more realized and self-assured character, but his defining moment came as he faced down the darkness within himself and spared the life of Darth Vader, the man whom he still believed to be capable of turning to the light. Luke did great deeds for his father and his friends, even though he personally suffered along the way. In the Disney trilogy, it is this turning inward of Luke's that has put off so many fans. Luke chooses to have no purpose, no one to care about, even though his sister and his friends are very much alive and in need of his help. This behavior may be understandable on a human level, considering his failure, which we're not really getting into because that discussion has been done to death, but it is undeniably unheroic. Would we choose to sulk in our rooms after blowing a job interview? Yeah, probably, but we aren't heroes. Heroes are supposed to suffer losses, failures, and setbacks, and then find a way to push forward anyway, avoiding the death spiral of self-pity, and find something still worth fighting for. In Logan, that's exactly what we find the titular character doing at the beginning of the movie. Much like Luke in the sequels, he has suffered a serious loss of friends and family, which isn't told to us before we are dropped into the current story. Unlike Luke, Logan has a purpose and a goal. It's nothing dramatic or even all that heroic in the superhero sense. Wolverine isn't by himself setting out to save all mutant kind, but he's always been a bit of a loner and a reluctant hero. So again, unlike the suddenly hopeless Luke, this is very much in line with Logan's established character. Logan is simply doing what he can for those who matter to him. Despite everything that has happened, despite the adamantium slowly poisoning him, Wolverine pushes forward because Charles needs him. What kept Logan going in those years since we've seen him? What force drove him to push through the pain, work long hours, and live in near squalor? Hope. Hope that one day he and Charles could buy a boat and live out the rest of their days in peace and tranquility in the sunlight. Putting that spark of hope into Logan's character is crucial, as it makes his arc more believable as he comes to care about Laura and the other mutant children and their futures. His hope was never truly dead. He just needed someone to come along and spark it back into a roaring blaze. Contrast that with the shell of Obi-Wan Kenobi who we witness in the first episode of his own show. The writing of this show really fell on its face when it introduced Nari, better known as that random Jedi, who confronts Obi in the deserts of Tatooine. When Nari tries to get Obi-Wan back into fighting gear, Kenobi tells him,
"We lost. Live a normal life."
This, despite the fact that not 10 minutes earlier, the same Obi-Wan told Owen,
"When the time comes, he must be trained."
It's almost like they wrote this line because they knew fans wanted it, but what the writers really wanted was to break Obi-Wan down into a hopeless sap so they could build him back up in their own image. Again, this is just so unheroic. If I may embark on an overly emotional speech about hope, I'd like to propose this idea. Their hope is predominantly what makes heroes so inspiring. Their ability to continue to fight, even when faced with impossible odds, is a standard to which we can all aspire. Captain America standing alone against Thanos and his entire armada, Aragorn riding to the Black Gate despite knowing he could not hope to defeat the armies of Mordor in battle, the encircled paratroopers of the 101st Airborne holding the line around Bastogne. Yeah, you know I was going to sneak in a Band of Brothers reference. Come on. All of these heroes had two options, action or inaction. They could have chosen to hide, to survive, to care only for themselves, but instead they chose action. They chose to fight, because they had hope that somehow, some way, even if they didn't live to see it, what they did in this life would echo in eternity. Heroes are not supposed to lose hope. That's what makes them heroes. They can and should have their moments of doubt and even despair.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
But their ability to push past that dread and carry on is what makes them heroic. Logan never stopped fighting, and never intended to. I mean, I think that the first scene of that movie shows that pretty clearly. He just had to be convinced to let his hope expand in scope. The treatment of Luke and Obi-Wan by Disney's writers is indicative of the incredible lack of ability to write in a nuanced fashion that is pervasive in the modern film industry. They can't have characters who are damaged and weakened but still willing to fight, however heavily their past failings may weigh on them. Instead, they insist on completely and totally breaking down these heroes, regardless of whether or not the hopeless, inward-looking husks we see on screen bear any resemblance to the courageous, persistent Jedi we have known and loved for literal decades. Every bit of optimism and hope can be stripped away so the hero can be rebuilt from the ground up by the new character that the writers have invented. More or less. Master Samwise, isn't that exactly what happens in Logan? I mean, you've got a plucky young girl who convinces the aging hero to take up one last fight. Why do you like that and not the Star Wars stories? You giant hypocrite. Well, my imaginary friend, you are correct that on the surface, these stories have significant similarities. But let's take a closer look at the details of their execution to see why Laura and Logan's relationship worked so much better than that of Luke and Rey and Obi-Wan and Leia. For one thing, and this is the most important thing, Lara is just a far more interesting and well-written character. Can you imagine modern Disney writing a character who doesn't feel the need to chatter constantly in order to show how smart or gifted she is? Laura is a damaged, broken person, much like her genetic father. Yes, she is incredibly capable, brutally so, but in an uncivilized, feral way. She is the raw product of a lab whose only purpose was creating weapons, now suddenly thrust into the rest of society. Leia and Rey, by contrast, feel too shiny, too polished, too comfortable in almost any situation. There's little give and take in their relationships with Luke and Obi-Wan. It's pretty much a one-way street where the younger characters show the older ones their way back to their purpose. And while that dynamic certainly exists within Logan, it is not the only one at play. For one thing, Laura has her own goal that she's working towards. She's not just focused on Obi-Wan. For another, Logan himself has to teach Laura basic things about, how to eat. Not to mention the other layers of Logan's motivation, largely his relationship with Charles. See, having an established character be suddenly devoted to someone they've just met, dropping everything and changing their ways in response to her call, is hard to make work. Audiences are not easily convinced to care about a new character, especially if the writers are focused on making said character
resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient.
Yeah, hold on, Wombat, we'll get to you soon. Logan doesn't just choose to accompany Laura and the others across the border because he has come to care for the little Hellraiser who shares his genes. While he most certainly does develop affection for Laura, he almost certainly would not have acted as he does in the movie's final scenes if not for the influence of Professor X. And this is a running theme throughout the X-Men movies. Charles convincing Wolverine to look beyond himself, to aid those in need, to be a hero. Without Xavier's involvement, without his pre-established relationship with Logan, Logan's ultimate decision to sacrifice himself simply never would have happened. Or if it did, it would not have been nearly as well earned. Logan's writers understood that they needed more than the new X-23 if their story was going to hit all the emotional beats properly. If only the writers of Indiana Jones 5 had learned the same lesson. I'm not sure whose brilliant idea it was to ditch all of Indy's usual sidekicks in favor of these two, but they certainly weren't in touch with the fans. Almost like that's a trend lately. But of course, we know why this happened. The powers that be at Disney realized that they own the Indiana Jones IP, realized that they haven't made one in a while, realized that Harrison Ford is almost 300 years old, and then finally realized that they need a new Indiana Jones if they're going to milk this particular cash cow. How's that going? There is a right way to introduce the successor to a beloved hero, but Dial of Destiny? Yeah, this ain't it, Chief. Well, why is that? Well, because Disney had no patience. They couldn't be bothered to introduce Helena Shaw's character gently, having her play second fiddle to Indy and then eventually take center stage as Harrison Ford's character faded into the background with dignity. It wouldn't have to take long. This could all happen over the course of one movie. But no, they had to immediately thrust her to the forefront and make her drive pretty much every major plot point in the whole movie, give her pretty much all the character development, and as an added insult to the titular character, all of the agency as well. Oh, Indy does stuff in the movie. He solves puzzles in classic fashion, and he even saves Wombat from falling to her death in the shallows of the Ionian Sea. Yeah, I can use Google Maps. But at the end of the day, agency is about choice. Logan has ultimate agency at the end of his film. He can choose to let the kids go off on their own, having accomplished his mission and received his pay, and return to a quiet, undisturbed life with no one to bother him, or he can choose to be a hero. He can choose to admit to himself that he really does care for Laura, and is willing to sacrifice what little time he has left to ensure her safety. What choice faces our favorite whip-wielding hero at the end of his fifth movie, you ask? Well, he is presented with two options. Stay in ancient Greece and get to live out the rest of his days, short though they may be, in conversation with one of history's most brilliant minds, or return to 1969 where his son is dead, his wife estranged from him, and he is wanted for the murder of multiple former colleagues, a fact the movie conveniently forgets, by the way. Neither of those choices is particularly heroic, but at least Indy gets to choose how he will spend the rest of his life. Oh wait, he won't! Because after he insists on staying in Syracuse, Helena knocks him out cold and drags him back to the future so he won't mess up the past, as if they hadn't already been doing that this whole time. Putting aside all discussion of whether or not it's remotely realistic that a single punch from an underwhelmingly muscular woman could knock out anybody, even a 300-year-old archaeology professor, the real issue with this blow is the damage done to Indiana Jones's agency and legacy. Our heroes are heroes because of the choices they make. Because over and over, they choose to be selfless and brave when it would be far easier to run and hide. Tony Stark chose to reject his former life after seeing how his genius was being used for evil. Han Solo chose to return to the fight even after he had received his material reward. Sam Gamgee chose to remain with Frodo time after time, even though it was always the more perilous choice. If you strip heroes of the ability to choose their own path, you take away their heroism too. Was Indy's choice to leave behind the problems of his life and go on a new adventure heroic? Not especially, but nothing about his life was either. But it was his choice. Until it wasn't. And they really made this moment as insulting as they could. Indy puts on his hat and his theme song begins to play as he prepares to embark on a journey unlike anything anyone had ever experienced before, and then, bam, he wakes up at home. Oh, and Miriam is back, because I guess Wombat fixed that relationship too, somehow. So, you see guys, it's okay that Indy didn't get to choose his path. He got his happy ending, even if he had to be dragged senseless to it. Was there really no better way to reach this conclusion? I mean, we could have had Indy choose of his own volition to leave behind the wonders of ancient Greece in order to return to the people who love him. That would certainly be heroic, but there would need to actually be someone to come home to. This final scene is the first time we see Miriam in the entire movie. If her and Indy's relationship had actually been shown on screen, perhaps struggling but still alive and not without hope, then this decision would actually carry some weight because he'd have to choose between his great loves of history and, his wife. And since heroes, true heroes, always choose human love over the love of power, knowledge, or whatever else, Indy would naturally have elected to go back home. But sadly, that's not the ending we got. Instead, we got a forced, contrived happy ending that resolved a conflict we weren't even privy to in the first place. So, thank goodness for Logan. Watching Wolverine tear through mutant hunting goons one last time brings tears to my eyes. This is how you properly send off an aging hero. Present him with a choice, have him choose the heroic, selfless option, and then let him return to form as best he can and go out in a blaze of glory. But not without stopping to say a heartfelt goodbye to the girl who had helped him find a greater purpose once again. Superhero movies aren't supposed to make you cry, man, but damn if Logan doesn't tug at the heartstrings. It's almost as good as Luke randomly evaporating into the essence of the Force, light years away from his sister and friends, alone and all but forgotten. What a wonderful send-off for a generational hero that was. And it made complete sense, too. Luke used up his Force meter by projecting himself onto Crate, and when your Force meter runs out, it drains your HP. That's how Star Wars games work, right? Putting aside potshots of the Disney sequels, I think it's pretty clear that the creators of Logan really cared about Wolverine and wanted to properly send him into the great beyond. They understood his established character, ever the reluctant hero, and were able to work that into one final story, giving him purpose and agency throughout, but also letting characters new and old inspire him into making one final heroic act. If only modern Disney understood this. If only they treated their aging heroes with respect and dignity, instead of lecturing them, making them panic in slightly disconcerting situations, and not giving them the agency, hope, purpose, and heroism that had so long accompanied them. We need heroes in the stories that we read, watch, hear, or play, be they real or fictional. If these inspiring characters continue to get broken down and mistreated, our ability to look up and believe that we can be more than we are will degrade until we are too depressed, despondent, and eternally scrolling through Disney Plus looking for something to watch, even though we know that nothing truly new will come out ever again. Okay, that's kind of a joke, but I can't help but feel that the reason these incredible heroes who have been admired for decades are being torn down is because the writers, producers, whoever behind these stories simply don't have the same sort of belief in and hope for human goodness that used to be pervasive throughout storytelling. Logan is a perfect example of how to rekindle that optimistic outlook. Here's to hoping there are more stories like it. More creators willing to believe in something beyond the sad state of our modern world. More writers and directors with the desire to inspire their audiences to be more than they are. I'm terrible at transitioning into outros, so hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if there are other heroes that you thought were retired really well, and I'll see you in the next one.